You're listening to How to Be a Better Human. I'm your host, Chris Duffy. When I was growing up, my dad worked in the World Trade Center. So that means that he was there for the bombing in 1993, and he just barely missed the last subway to make it into the Twin Towers on September 11th. I remember in 1993, on the night of the bomb, when my dad finally came home, he was standing in the doorway. His face was jet black with soot. His suit was covered in ash. He looked so preposterous standing there. He looked like a kind of overdressed chimney sweep. And we burst into laughter as we ran in relief to hug him. Years later, after I graduated college, I moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I was teaching fifth grade during the day and performing comedy at night. And I was in Boston on the day of the marathon bombings. And that night, we sheltered in place as we heard sirens in the street and helicopters overhead. It's probably the only time I've ever thought that I was doing something brave by eating an entire pot of spaghetti while sitting on the floor in my underwear. You know, as a comedian, my first instinct is to want to make jokes about things. But when terrible things happen in the world, sometimes comedy feels irrelevant or even inappropriate. Or like, how can I go out and make jokes when there's blood on the ground? Ignoring that kind of naked human suffering, it feels offensive. To try and make people laugh, it feels wrong. I'm not sure that words can ever really do justice to the horrors of violence or oppression or a pandemic. But I do think that one of the most important functions of art more broadly is to communicate what we can't express otherwise. And the more that I think about and live through acts of terror and moments of tragedy, the more that I do think that laughter and joy in their wake, they aren't inappropriate. They're actually necessary. In response to those who would create fear and terror, joy can be a political act. It's not about toxic positivity or ignoring the difficulties and challenges of life, but instead finding that joy and pain, that those two things can exist at the same time. And today's guest, Miracle Jones, she is a community organizer who has done a lot of deep thinking about exactly that. Here's a clip from her talk, and this is about the role of joy as a form of radical resistance, survival, and protection for Black folks in the U.S. and across the world. Here's that clip.
Imagine feeling guilty just because you experienced joy in your life. Many seem to forget that existing and thriving in a world that was predicated upon your destruction is in itself a reason to celebrate. So we take up space as ours has been stolen and gentrified from us. We dance in the middle of the street as we show up for each other and remember our hope for the future. We celebrate together because we are a community of people bonded together in joy and pain, who refuse to leave each other. We fight together because we have no other choice.
Okay, we are going to be back with more from Miracle Jones after this quick break. And we are back. We're talking about joy with Miracle Jones.
Hi, my name is Miracle Jones. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy here at One Hood Media, and I'm so thankful to talk to you about finding joy today.
Why is joy important in your life?
Joy is important in my life just because it gives you something to look forward to. And it's also a reminder that the world, as many dumpster fires as that's going on and as many negative things that's happening, it's a reminder that there's still some positive, good things in the world. And there's still something to fight for. There's still something to enjoy, to take the moment and be thankful for and find gratitude in. And so for me, joy is so important because it took me a long time to be able to have it and to find it and to keep it and to hold on to it. So I always try to make sure there's something that I can be happy about no matter what's going on. So I know I referenced it a little bit in my talk, but when my dad went to jail, that really changed the trajectory of my whole family. We, for lack of better words, were like homeless as a result of that. And it took years to like rebuild and to be able to like have stable housing. And then as soon as we got stable housing, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder and spent like my whole entire high school and the first 2 years of college, like really, really sick in and out of hospitals. And so it took me a long time to be able to just be able to laugh and be able to enjoy life and enjoy moments without pain and frustration. And so for me, I always try to make sure that I'm taking time out of my day, of my week, no matter what's going on, just to laugh, to catch up with friends, to relax, to like find a movie that I've never watched before, or find organizers that I've never worked with before, to build relationships to keep that joy flowing.
You know, it's interesting because I think that sometimes people have this idea that like joy is the opposite of pain or struggle, right? That like you can't have them both at the same time. And I think something that's really interesting about your talk and your work is that you kind of make the case that you can be fighting to make the world a better place. You can be going through really difficult things in your personal life and you still can have joy. In fact, not only can you have it, but it's actually really important.
It is very important. And again, if a lot of times when you come out to some of the protests, you see people dancing, you see people laughing, you see people hugging. Some of the chants are about like the freedoms in the future, and there's envisioning sessions, because joy is a part of protest, joy is a part of pain. You know, we don't live in these siloed lives where we pick either or other. And it's so interesting that with joy, we try to like shame and guilt people for finding happiness and silver linings of what's going on in the world and things that are beyond our control. But you have to have joy, no matter how minuscule it might be to you, because joy is how we are able to engage and strengthen and support, each other. We can't get free and we can't, move on to the next level if we don't have joy, because then you're just going to have a bunch of miserable, hurt people being forced together in close spaces, and that creates trauma and drama. And so that's why joy and happiness is infused into like revolutionary work.
It makes me think also of how so often the strongest relationships, whether they be friendships or romantic relationships or even family relationships, they're strong not because we've never gone through something difficult together, but precisely because we know that when things are hard, this person is there.
Yeah. And a real friend knows how to like crack jokes at like that right time. I remember being at my dad's funeral and we were laughing and talking about different things that had happened because, in that sadness, we still found joy in the memories. We still found joy in community bonding and sharing our experiences. I think a lot of times people conflate joy with like toxic positivity, which is like, I think it's like the meme where the person's like the dog is sitting in the house. It's fine. Everything is fine. Like, it's not fine. It's okay to say, this is not fine. This is not okay. But like, I'm going to maybe laugh today instead of cry. I'm going to sit there and crack jokes as I put this fire out, or be mindful of what this next phase of my life could be. I'm not just going to remember the hard times or the sad times. I think that's what the difference is. A lot of times people try to like push like happiness and tea and crystals and meditation, all this stuff. Like, pretend the world isn't a bad place. No, the world is a bad place. Like, we're in it, we're living through it. And we have to face that reality. But you can't pretend that people are just these machines where they just go through negative stuff and never take a moment for themselves to just be thankful for who they are and what they've been through, and to acknowledge that there is some type of good in this world.
In comedy, we often say that comedy is tragedy plus time.
Yes.
And I feel like there's some truth to that, right? Like, often the funniest things are the things that are the most painful. And then you look back on them and you go like, okay, well, there was something really, and it's never to say like that was okay at the moment. It's just to say that we can laugh at the human experience of having this thing and find joy in that, which, I don't know, what you're saying really resonates with me, that idea.
But it's also a reality that sometimes you just need to tell a joke to get through the day, or to tell a story, or to share an experience, because you do have to laugh to keep from crying sometimes. But I'm not talking about avoiding what's going on in your life. I'm talking about taking a moment, even in the darkest of times, to sit there and say, I deserve to be happy. I deserve to be okay. I deserve to have a laugh. I deserve to have peace of mind. I deserve it, and I'm going to claim it and not feel guilty about it.
Hmm. Is there a person in your personal life, or it could even be in the public sphere, who's a model for you on how to practice that kind of joy?
It's my siblings. Like, my siblings and I, we are very fortunate that we have like a close relationship. So no matter what happens in the world, like, we can always crack jokes. We can always fall back on each other when we're having like a bad day. My siblings have been like my rock, my strength, my crutch, no matter what I was going through, because we were going through all this stuff together. Our experiences were, of course, were vastly different. But I remember one time when I was going in for surgery, my brother was like, well, if you die, I guess I get your ring collection. So it's a win for me either way. And it was just like, true, right? But we're, of course he was worried and stuff.
Of
But
course.
it was like, it's just like it's like us doing jokes and remembering like the positive and the negative at the same time. But that's just how we always go through and like show up for each other. And we've always been able to do that, and that's kind of how like my worldview has always been since that time.
So I wonder, how do you deal with the tragic, broken parts of our society and the world while not letting them define you?
I deal with it by keep going. I'm thinking of like the go-go protests in DC, when people were literally like, we don't want to hear this music. We really do not want to see Black people in the middle of the streets. And people had to come together and organize and push back. And that's really how you deal with this broken system, the systems of oppression, is that you build community relationships with other organizers, with other groups. So when things happen, you have a coalition of people who come together to respond, to fight back, to strategize, to uplift and amplify arguments and messaging. And that's, in itself very amazing and happy to see when you do a call to action and hundreds of people show up. But sometimes the reality is, when you're organizing in those first few weeks, it's maybe like 5 to 10 people who are showing up, right? And so that's finding joy in the fact that like people hear what's going on, they care about making a change, and they're using their time, their bodies, their money, their finances, and their whatever resources at their disposal to help you push and fight back.
I imagine that there's people who are listening to this who are thinking like, I don't think of, dealing with police violence. I don't think people associate with like, well, that sounds joyful. So how do you incorporate joy into these really serious topics that you deal with?
One, you celebrate the wins. You celebrate when things go right, and you share that information. Like, yes, this is what we were looking for. This is what we're fighting for. Two, you balance the type of work that you do. So, for instance, there are projects that I'm working on where I know the results won't happen for another 5 to 10 years. So trying to change like systems and trying to get people to think a different way about, violence. I know that's not going to happen overnight. So I have long-term projects. I also have short-term projects, things that I know I can get a result in within days. And I also do direct outreach. So when you're able to talk to someone about different tools and resources that they didn't need that were at their disposal, and you're able to have someone say, you're the first time someone's talked to me like I've been a human being in weeks or in months, that brings joy, but it also brings sadness, and it gives me strength to keep going on and keep fighting and keep forging ahead, because I know I'm making a difference. And even if I'm not going to be able to see the end results right now or in my lifetime, I know I'm laying the groundwork so other people are not going to have to go through the same pain and struggles and hardships in the future. And so that's one of the ways that I look forward for like future joy to sustain the work. But some of the things I also do is try to turn my email notifications off at some point. It's so hard to be like, stop working. But to turn my email notifications off, we people now put in rest days on the calendar. This is a day of rest, right? This is a day where we're not going to work. We're going to sit there and we're going to watch like films and documentaries of organizers who have won. We're going to listen to elders. We're going to read books of different organizers, and we're going to get information and to be motivated to continue on that type of way. So there's different ways that you're able to connect joy and struggle and revolution and organizing together to keep working and to do work that's really, really tough and really, really heavy.
I'd love to know what are some of the other little daily practices that you keep up to keep these things moving in your life.
I look at art a lot. I love art. One of the organizations here, CADB, they just did a art show, and the majority of the art were for people who've been incarcerated in local Pennsylvania prisons. So they submitted art and they released it. So that was pretty cool. So I look at art. People laugh at me all the time when I tell them this, but I am a sucker for like good romance, cheesy romance dramas. Like I love K-dramas. I love Hallmark. I love that this whole like countdown to Christmas thing. It brings me so much happiness. I know it's the cheesiest thing ever, but sometimes I'll look at the little trailers for when the movies come out. I'm going home for the fall holidays, so I've already told my sister like Saturday night we're doing like 2 movies back to back. So pick the movies we've got to watch. And we're making, we're making hot chocolate. But on a daily basis, I listen to like interviews from James Baldwin to Audre Lorde. I'm like, yes, they got it. They got it. And that fills me. And then one thing I do at the end of the day, I tell myself like, what good thing happened today? What bad thing happened today? And what thing can I work to change the next day? So it's not like a good thing, a bad thing, a better thing, but it's like just be reflective and then move on. I've struggled still with this whole like remote life to like cut my brain off from working, but I am trying to do that like a lot more now, in addition to like creating my own artwork and things of that nature.
I know that One Hood is very arts focused as an organization. So I have a question about how that ties in. But before that, if someone's not familiar with One Hood, can you give us just the breakdown of what it is?
Yes. So we're a social justice arts organization. We're founded in Pittsburgh in 2006 in response to gun violence that was happening in the area. So a lot of our founders, who also happen to be hip hop artists and poets, would walk around the neighborhoods doing anti-violence outreach, bringing kids in to teach them about art, giving them something to do at night, as opposed to getting in trouble, trying to just let people know that there are different alternatives in the world. And from that, we kind of branched out to doing media. And so the Media Academy part came in because we started creating our own media. We started teaching youth about how to analyze media, what stories are there. And so we've branched out to do like a full-on multimedia arts organization. We're very lucky that we've been able to do that.
It also feels like big picture, this is very related to just the role of art, right? Like what is the purpose of art in our lives? Why does art matter? Why do we have art across history and across culture? That seems like a big piece of what One Hood is actually getting at.
Like Nina Simone said, the duty of an artist is to reflect the signs of the times. But part of the reflection is giving people like hope for the future, allowing people the space to envision what a world looks like, where all of our resources and needs are met, and inviting people to tell their own stories. A lot of times, a lot of the pain and trauma comes from, whether intentional or accident, violence that occurs because people who are impacted are not at the tables making executive decisions, not making policy decisions, and so a part of art is allows anyone and everyone to be a part of the conversation. And you just have a moment to like envision the world, to tell your story, to share your struggle. I think art is like so important and impactful in that mindset because of art, whether it was cooking or making, whipped coffee, or learning tap dancing or singing or watching media, watching, movies and TV shows. That's all art. Watching performances, that is all art. The plays, the virtual museums, that's all art. And that got us through the worst parts of this pandemic. And so I think you cannot divorce art and joy from any type of organizing, any type of tech building, any type of work that people do.
Yeah, it's also, I think about how with art, so much of making art is deciding what is in the frame, right? What gets highlighted, what is put in the foreground, what's put in the background. And that's exactly what One Hood is trying to do too, right? Being like, these stories about Black people are damaging and they're not accurate. And we can change the frame by media training. We can change the frame by creating our own stories. We can change that by shifting what's in the focus and what's out of focus. And it feels to me like that is a big part of not just art, but also joy too, right? Is like expanding the frame to include the parts that aren't just this negative piece, this inaccurate, smaller piece too.
Yeah, and it's also allowing people to tell their own stories and understanding that people are the experts in their own lives. There are so many people doing amazing things in this world. And so for us, we're like, who's doing the artwork? Who can we put out? So if you look at our social media, we amplify artists on Mondays and visual artists on Fridays. We're not just like amplifying our friends. We're literally just combing social media and trying to find people whose voices that we can share, and whose work that we can share, because it's so important to us that other people have space and opportunities and abilities to be shared and showcased. And we're really trying to do that in very intentional ways. So that's some of the things that we've been doing. Like, whose story can we tell? We don't have to always get credit. A lot of the work that we push out, we don't get credit for. And it's by intention and design, because we believe in people so much. And that's what we want to see.
All right, don't go anywhere. We're going to take a short break, but we will be back with more from Miracle Jones in just a moment. Okay, we are back. It's something that we talked about a little bit, or you touched on earlier, is the idea of toxic positivity, right? And I think it's interesting to balance your commitment to joy with not falling into this kind of toxic trap where it's like you're not allowed to ever feel sad or angry, and you always need to find a bright side. There's always a silver lining to everything, and sometimes there isn't. So how do you balance that commitment to joy with not falling into toxic positivity?
I practice realism a lot, and I'm trying to keep this like very PG. But I cuss like a sailor sometimes when things do not go wrong.
That's a good way to, honestly, that's a great way to solve problems. Sometimes you need a curse.
Sometimes you have to curse, sometimes you have to yell. But I'm very much try to be present in the present and like feel my feelings. And I know it just sounds like I'm like copying, pasting words, but like when something goes bad, I'm like, this is bad. This is messed up. I'm not happy about this. Like, what am I going to do? What are the next steps? I usually, because I don't like jail or prison personally, so I have to take a moment and think about like what's happening, right? Be angry, but be strategic. So I know there's been a lot of trials going on right now, just about different murders and racial violence that has happened in the past couple of years. And I watch these things, I hear some of these arguments, and I'm like, this is really messed up. Again, I'm usually cussing when I'm talking about
Yeah, messed up. Like, we all understand what it actually means.
We're autocorrect, right? Yeah. Doing the autocorrect version. And I feel it. And I allow myself to feel it and I process it. And then I try to be like, okay, what can I do to fix it? And if I can't fix it, can I just sit and cry? There are days where I will just like sit and cry. I'm like, this is like very sad and I feel helpless and I can't do anything about it. And then, I'm like, okay, I felt it. Let me figure out where I can be of support, where I can be of action and where I can change. Let me focus on that. And that's how I deal with things. Am I able to hop on a plane and stop, conflict from happening around the world? No. Can I talk to my elected officials about not supporting war? Can I talk to corporations? Can I talk to different people? Yes, I can do that. I can make that change that way. Can I help support people who are resettled in my area? Can I advocate that, my social work programs talks about violence and anti-Blackness? Can I do those things? Yes. And so that's how I navigate when things get like too heavy. It's just like figuring out where I can bloom, where I'm planting, and where I can make a difference.
So if someone is listening and they are, they're going through an eviction or they're going through a diagnosis with chronic disease, these things that are, that you've experienced and that are challenging, for sure, really challenging. Maybe I imagine that there's some people who have a lot of difficulty in finding the joy in those moments. What would you say to someone who's going through that, who's in the heart of it right now? How can they find a way to see something other than just the struggle at the moment?
I understand that, and I want to be very clear. The eviction, the illness, the surviving trauma and violence, that's not joyful. For me, what's joyful is being able to look forward to the future. What was joyful was being able to reflect on the positive things that happen. And what's joyful is being able to make a plan of action to make next steps. And if that means going raging at political leaders because the supports weren't there, then do that. If that means building up a community of mutual aid, then so be it, do that. But I want to be very clear. When I talk about joy, it's something that is personal to me and decision I personally made when I navigated life's ups and downs and challenges. And I think that other people can do this as well. You understand that the negative things that happen in the world, the violent things that you're going through, doesn't stop you and preclude you from laughing, from finding peace, from creating community. That's what I would say.
It almost sounds to me like, correct me if this is wrong, please, but it sounds to me like part of your joy is the joy of resilience, right? Is like that you were able to get through that you find a joy in having gotten through these things that seemed really like almost impossible at the time.
Yeah. And it's also understanding that some of those things shouldn't happen. But it's like, yeah, I'm happy. I'm proud of myself, for going through it. When I was going through things, I was like, yeah, this sucks. This is not okay. This is not right. This is not fair. And for me, it's like, oh, okay. But I also had a community with my siblings, right? So like I had this built-in support system. So even when my parents were going through their things, my siblings and I were always going to look out for each other. We're always going to support each other. We were always going to be cracking jokes when we were staying in inefficiency. We were like, okay, we're going to build a fort and we're going to play. So my little sister isn't super scared about what's happening right now. There are things that we did. And for me, I always found joy in my siblings. So I always knew that there was going to be something better for us, even when things were getting worse, because I had each other. We have separate, beliefs and views, but my family and I, we've always been able to support each other, even when we weren't always talking or always getting along. So I've always been able to find a moment of joy and peace in those situations. And so that's where my worldview was developed and where it came from. And it's very funny. My first speaking engagement, it happened just because I showed up. It wasn't that I set out to do it. It wasn't that I had like a life plan. It was that I would tell things and it would resonate with people. And sometimes I would feel bad because I would make people cry. And I was like, it's not what I wanted to do. I was just trying to share like what my stories were and try to maybe talk about things we need to do to change. And then I'd have people just like crying and sobbing in front of me. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I need to tell my story less. And then my boss was like, no, go tell more people. And I was like, okay. And so that's how it happened. So I'm thankful that you said that. But yeah, it's been, even with that, it's just been like a journey because I'm learning to be like more vulnerable because I'm usually like, nobody cares. Like, nobody cares. So that's why I think. And to hear people like, oh, this is cool, you should share it. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. And I hope it can help people be better humans. I'm not taking responsibility if they don't, but I hope it could help somebody somewhere.
Yeah, I'm going to put that same disclaimer on everything that I've said in every episode of this show, which is I'm not taking it on if you don't become a better human. I'm not you're supposed to be you're the guest. You're supposed to be making him a better human, not me. So if you don't take it on, I definitely not taking it on.
I just put the call to action out there. I just give you some tips and you can decide whether or not you want to be better or not.
There you go.
That's the world.
Well, I also love the idea of you saying your truth and it being so powerful that people literally are brought to tears, and then you being like, oh, I probably should not do this as much. That's like, no, that's the most unique, incredible ability of all, to be able to touch other people.
Yeah, I think it's an honor, but I think sometimes I always want to take people on and save them and hold them and hug them. Obviously, you can't because of COVID, but then obviously, people have to do their own healing and impact their own trauma. And so I wasn't prepared for people to be receptive to my story. So when I first did the TED Talk, I was like, are you sure? Because I can get all these other people, their orders, they're great. People are like, no, we like you. I was like, are you sure you want to talk to me? And they're like, yes. I was like, okay. And so, it just took a little bit of time and support and persistence. I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. And it's kind of funny because I had to talk to my mom, my siblings. I'm like, I would like to talk about the worst times in our lives. Is this okay? But even having those conversations, it was cool because we did, as a family, get to re-talk about our trauma and our pain and what we hoped our lives would be and what our lives are like now. And so I think that reflection is also a way to find joy, because we get to see how far we've gone or even how far we strayed and figure out what we want our lives to look like and work towards those goals too.
What is one idea that has made you a better human?
One idea that has made me a better human is to bloom where you are planted. And that's basically to be okay with where you are at and work in the places that you are at. Don't always try, to take on too much or to wait for when the time is right, but just do what you can now. If you're, a singer, sing about things that you care about. If you're a gardener, tend to the universe and the environment where you are. Don't always try to do stuff outside of your comfort zone. Don't take on too much. Just be who you are and work in the skill sets that you have to make a difference. That's one thing that, has helped.
Well, Miracle Jones, thank you so much for being on the show. It's such a pleasure to get to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. I'm very honored and excited, and just thank you for the opportunity.
That is it for today's episode. I am your host, Chris Duffy, and this has been How to Be a Better Human. Thank you so much to our guest, Miracle Jones. Her organization is called One Hood. That's the number 1, HOOD.org. On the TED side, this show is brought to you by The Bright Side of Abhimanyu Das, The Silver Lining of Daniela Balarezo, Frederica Elizabeth Yosefov's Half Full Glass, Ann Powers' Blue Sky, and The Upside of Kara Newman. From PRX Productions, How to Be a Better Human is brought to you by the overjoyed Jocelyn Gonzalez, the underjoyed Pedro Rafael Rosado, and the exactly right amount of joyed Sandra Lopez Monsalve. Thank you so much to everyone who has worked on this show behind the scenes over the year. I am so grateful for your effort and your thought and your care. And I am so grateful to all of you listeners for listening and supporting this show. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you have been enjoying the work that we're making for you, please share this episode with a friend and leave us a review. Thank you so much.